Balan Wonderworld is a thoughtful experience that heavily encourages player creativity and experimentation, wrapped in a wonderful fantasy world wherein we heal the broken hearts of those most in need of compassion. It also flopped really hard, and is considered one of the worst video games ever made. This reputation, I think, is wholly unjust. I already made a video about why Balan Wonderworld and its design is actually brilliant, and that's probably one of my favorite works. But in this video, I plan to detail a little more about what exactly the game offers, what its goals were, and why people seemed to despise it so much from a more cultural perspective. Let's dig in. I sincerely hope this doesn't read as misanthropic, but people are kinda bad at logic and compassion on average. I'm aware that Yuji Naka has been arrested multiple times on suspicions of insider trading. I'm also aware that he's been accused of treating employees and games poorly. Not only is there no real proof for the latter, but even if every bad thing people say about him is accurate, that has no real bearing on whether he designs good games, or whether the games he makes are good. If you made a good game, the game is good, even if you're not a good person. I'm not sure why this is difficult to grasp, but good art is not always made by good people, and bad art is not always made by bad people. Often these things are unrelated. Not that I believe in good or bad people to begin with. Yuji Naka's involvement in a game's production has been consistently good for them turning into thoughtful, creative, visually stunning explorations of their respective genres. Balan Wonderworld did not turn out bad because of his involvement. I don't think it turned out bad, period. I just think he made an old game for a new world, and that was the biggest reason it flopped. Balan Wonderworld is a highly experimental game that makes resource management a core mechanic, and seeks to weave a risk-reward system into everything. This is achieved by making all your costume abilities a limited resource. That makes sense to me. Many European Amiga platformers used similar means to encourage both exploration and careful strategy. Bringing that to 3D is long overdue. Unfortunately, the world doesn't really want experimentation in its 3D platformers, at least not radical experimentation. So when making another game as bizarre and outwardly bold as Sonic, Rodea, Knights, and Billy Hatcher, Yuji Naka was signing himself up for failure. The world already knows what it wants in a 3D platformer, and it no longer wants strange ideas delivered with a creative soul. And make no mistake, the change in cultural taste is for the worse. People largely want unchallenging art, which doesn't ask questions, doesn't provoke its audience to think, and is diluted so heavily that any lasting impact is effectively erased. Balan Wonderworld's greatest crime, I believe, was being unusual, and the world needs more unusual art, not less. The foundation to Balan Wonderworld, much like Sonic, is elegant simplicity. The idea that by providing the player with a simple set of mechanics and a simple set of limitations, one can encourage them to experiment, to make their own way in the world, exploring the mechanical nuances of this interactive experience. Unfortunately, it feels like people are rapidly losing grip of their ingenuity and creativity, particularly where consuming and engaging with art is concerned. They lack imagination and curiosity, or are too afraid or stubborn to explore possibilities. Balan Wonderworld is something like an unusual Metroidvania, where you use a vast arsenal of 80 costumes to explore open collectathon environments, and most players seem content to, well, not think about their tools. One of the most common criticisms of Balan Wonderworld is that its costumes and abilities are too situational, or that you're given access to too few collectibles your first time through stages. But this is patently false. While the costumes may seem to only have one utility at first, they in reality have multiple, and making clever use of them allows you to explore areas that would normally seem off limits. The most essential element to Balan Wonderworld's game design is thinking, can I use this costume for this? And then, well, experimenting. More often than not, you can. and in this way the game strongly encourages player agency. There are very few artificial barriers besides the costumes themselves. Speaking of those costumes, people really hate them for a multitude of reasons. Chiefly, they hate that when you die, you lose the costume. That's because costumes, particularly the most useful ones, are difficult to find and acquire. But this is exactly why losing them is important. For the same reason weapons break in Breath of the Wild, and any limitation anywhere is placed on anything in games. It encourages critical thinking about resource management, and adds a risk-reward element to the entire game. When I'm strongly considering making a tricky jump, that has real weight in Balan, because if I miss, I'll lose the costume I worked so hard to obtain and be severely nerfed. This is fundamental to traditional challenge-focused game design. You want the player to weigh their options and ultimately arrive to their own conclusion about the best way forward. The fact that people were complaining about this feature only serves to highlight how little we now value self-improvement and emotional stake in our interactive art. And you might argue, well, if it's what people want, who's to say it's wrong? And, well, what we want is not usually what's best for us. Most people think McDonald's is serviceable food, but that doesn't make it good. It's deliberately addictive and low quality. Art, as a concept, is meant to enhance culture, enrich our lives with new experiences and new ways of thinking, to challenge us and elevate us to a higher state of introspection. Video games are uniquely poised to do this, specifically because they are interactive and place us in someone else's shoes. Demanding that games be made easier and easier so that we have a simpler time digesting them without thinking runs counter to the very idea of art and contributes to the homogenization of all creative efforts. Balan Wonderworld is a good game. Its biggest crime was being made at the wrong time, in an era where the things that are strange and good and experimental about art are being shuffled aside in favor of pandering, personalized experiences that do nothing to challenge their audience. I strongly recommend giving it a try if you haven't yet, and looking at it with fresh, optimistic eyes. It's one in a dying species of games, and with its floundering reception, the light of AAA game development grows ever dimmer. Hey everyone, it's Addy. You made it to the end of the video. This is on my lower quality mic and I'm going to be rambling a bit. I suppose this video was a bit more intense than most, but I knew it was going to be more intense going in. I was replaying Balan Wonderworld while I had COVID, and a lot of my thoughts about artistry, how it influences culture, and how it's influenced by culture came to the surface, and I really wanted to talk about some of these things. Now, by necessity in the video, there was a lot of generalizing. Of course, I'm aware that die-hard hobbyists are always going to think about the art they consume. I don't doubt that for a moment, but it also matters what the general public believes, and as more people play video games and come into the medium, it's going to become more gentrified and more homogenized if we don't make an active effort to prevent that. And frankly, we haven't been making an effort to prevent that. Some people I'm sure will bring up that Balan Wonderworld isn't even particularly heavy or groundbreaking as experimentation goes. And yeah, I agree. While by modern standards it's a very experimental work, it's not that experimental. And the fact that people were complaining about the game design choices, which were pretty surface level mutations on what we expect from 3D platformers, really tells me that we can't handle that kind of experimentation in our medium, especially where interactivity is concerned, and that greatly discourages me. Like, I don't think art should just exist to give us more stuff to shove into our eye holes, you know? I feel like it has the, especially interactive art, has the potential to challenge us more than any other medium by virtue of its interactivity, to literally place us somewhere else where we're doing things in ways that we never would otherwise. But people feel entitled to a world that makes sense. They feel entitled for their art to be easily consumable, to give them a ride, to give them a good time. And especially in the digital age, more so than ever, people who aren't game designers feel qualified to tell game designers how to do their job, how to express their artistic vision. And that's done a great deal of harm to the medium as well. And it's difficult not to notice that in video games and most any other artistic medium, we're regressing. We're not only seeing repeats of ideas that we've had hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of times before, but lesser repeats of those ideas. And oftentimes people don't even realize that they're watching repeats. Regardless of whether you agree with me about any of this stuff, though, the most important thing always in any of these videos is to get you to think. It's to get you to think about yourself, about the art you consume, about the people and the world around you. That's what this is all about at the end of the day. So, unfortunately, it's time to segue into where I ask you to pledge to my Patreon, because it's more important now than ever. I do have some relatively cheap tiers, and if you subscribe to one of the higher tiers, which are also relatively cheap, I will make a video essay for you personally about art you love, and any amount at all helps, as it always does. Anyway, I hope everyone's had a lovely start to the new year. I realize we're a fair bit into it now, but better late than never. And speaking of my Patreon, there are also so many lovely people who are already subscribed, and I'll list those people for you right now. Here we go.
Always be yourself, but if you can be a unicorn, always be a unicorn. Always be yourself, but if you can be a unicorn, always be a unicorn.